Welcome to Emergency Preparedness Response Series, brought to you by the Florida Association of Museums Foundation and Florida Humanities. This program is the sixth in a six-part series, and today we'll be focusing on emergency response tabletops for medium to large organizations. I want to thank our partners, Florida Humanities, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Heritage National Task Force, which is a part of FEMA, the Conservation Center for Historic Artifacts, the Florida Department of State Division of Cultural Affairs, Visit Florida, Cure Collections Care, Florida Museum, the Society of Florida Archivists. Funding for this program is provided by a grant from Florida Humanities with funds from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Just want to go through a few housekeeping items. We have today myself, Carmen Godwin, the FAM Foundation Program Manager. I have Caroline on here, but she wasn't able to make it today. This webinar will be recorded. Also, if you need closed captioning, it is available to you. There is a CC button on your control panel, and you can turn the closed captioning on and off with that CC button. If you need help with that, just chat me privately in the chat box. Again, my name is Carmen Godwin. The agenda has 4 segments of questions. We'll go through those and more detailed instructions about the program today in just a moment. If you have any questions throughout the program, you can type those in the chat box at any time. We will make sure that they get answered for you. However, if we do have a Q&A segment after each segment, you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question directly to our speaker. Finally, we will have a survey that we'll email to you after the program, and we just ask that you complete that. It takes about 2 minutes. It helps us understand not only what you thought about this program, but what future programs that you would like to see the Florida Association of Museums Foundation offer in the future. Now I want to welcome our speaker moderator, Rebecca Kennedy. She is a collections care specialist. She's worked in Florida museums and was a collections manager and preservation specialist at the Smithsonian Institution for 11 years. She has received certification in first aid to cultural heritage in times of crisis, and she is chair of the Association of Registrars and Collection Specialists Emergency Committee. She's responded to institutional emergencies throughout the country, as well as national emergencies. And so she's got that hands on the ground experience and so we are super happy to have her here today to kind of walk us through these scenarios, since she's really been through these disasters in the past. Rebecca, at this time, I'm going to pass over the mic to you, and if you'll share your screen, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Carmen. All right, well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Everyone can see my screen okay? I'm taking it. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks. So what I really would love to do today is to have you all sort of just dive in and to practice what it's like to do a response. And this takes a little creative thinking and going into this imaginary world. So I just want to go over the process before we get started. So there's going to be 4 scenarios. They're each going to be 10 minutes. You have 10 minutes to complete them. And then we will follow each scenario with a discussion. Each group should appoint someone to present the results in 2 minutes or less. I want you to pretend like you're really reporting out to an emergency manager or a board member, and you only have like 2 minutes to do it, preferably less, because you can only keep people's attention for that long. Treat this as a real emergency. Do not use thoughtful terms such as what we would do, but instead say what we will do. You only have the people in your group to work with. No one else has shown up to help you with your emergency. So each scenario is given with a basic discussion question to help questions to help guide your conversation. But feel free to address more issues than what I'm telling you to do. I just want you to give you some helpful leading observations. Only worry about your role. If you're like, well, facilities probably would have, okay, just assume facilities is doing their job. Just focus on what you can do. And there should be a leader set up. We're kind of working within the incident command structure here. So make sure you have a leader who assigns roles and people who know what they're doing, and can think about what their responsibilities would be within these scenarios. For those of you who saw the webinar on building a plan, we did talk about incident command systems, but if not, here's a little quick cheat sheet on kind of what those incident command structures look like. These are two very different ones, but this is sort of how they would look based on the size of the emergency, the size of your institution, and who all can respond. Now, these teams are not arbitrary. You actually have to think about your process for responding to an emergency. And so here is sort of a, this again, I presented the salvage techniques lecture also from FAM a few weeks ago. And this is sort of what a response looks like. You have the emergency, you have your documentation teams, you have movement between triage, packing station, and new storage. Some might be more relevant than others based on the emergency, but this is what a large response looks like. Also, to make your lives a little bit easier, when you go into the breakout rooms, the scenarios will disappear from your screen. So I have created a Google Doc where you can access these scenarios, but try not to read ahead, just do the one we're working on. So that link should be in the chat box now. So any questions before we go to the first scenario?
Again, if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat box, or you can just unmute yourself and ask them directly.
Okay, if there's no questions, I'll give you your first scenario and then we'll send you into your breakout groups. And I will pop in and out of your breakout groups. Don't panic when I pop in. I'm just there to make sure you're going the right way. All right, scenario 1. At 6 p.m. on a Friday night in July, security notes that the HVAC system isn't cooling. They notify facility staff who inspect the situation and order the parts, which will take 2 to 3 days to arrive because it is the weekend. At 8 a.m. on Monday, collection staff arrive on site to discover the temperature and humidity are well above museum standards in storage and exhibition areas, but they were never notified by security or facilities of the HVAC problem. Readings show the humidity is 95% and temperature is 80 degrees inside. The building has been open all weekend, causing further spikes in the humidity. Visitors had complained all weekend of the uncomfortable temperature. So using this scenario, I want you to create an ICS system and determine roles and responsibilities with members of your team. And what specific steps would you have taken to protect objects and people? And how would the institution prevent this from ever happening again? All right, so the scenario is in the Google Doc I sent you, but Carmen, I think we're ready.
Okay, I just want to say a few things first. If you are here with another person from your organization, I put you in a room together. If you would rather do that differently for the next scenario, you can just type me a message in the chat box. There are 2 to 3 people in each room. And again, even though you may not be with the same institution, you're sort of acting together as if you are to solve this problem. And again, if one person can be the scribe and report back, that would be awesome. All right, I'm going to send you to your breakout rooms now. Make sure to click that Google Drive before you do so that you have the scenario with you. Welcome back, everyone. I'm going to ask each group to kind of report back. If you could turn your audio on, make sure it's on for me, for whoever's going to be reporting back. I'm going to start with room 1, Erica and Jenny. If one of you could let us know what you guys talked through.
Yeah, I guess I can do that for us. This actually is something that happened 2 weeks ago to us, but not to the levels of humidity and temperature. So this is sort of familiar. So what we would first do, or what we will first do, is contact security and facilities folks. And then once we assess what they have and what they're in process doing, we would likely request portable units for dehumidifiers and fans. We'd set up the fans that we currently have access to in our spaces to increase circulation of the air and get things moving. And then we'd work through to see if there's any areas that are worse than others and prioritize those areas to get the dehumidifiers and fans that our facilities folks would then bring in. I think that in the future, what we would probably do is ensure that we have a list of materials that are on site as far as dehumidifiers and fans, and then also ensure that our facility staff know what the chain of command is and like know who it needs to be reported to. Security should have alerted us, and we should have also had those units already in place prior to once the system was down. Those units should have been put in place so they could automatically kick in as needed. And then we'd also probably talk to our head of facilities folks to see what the issue was with HVAC and if there is a redundancy that we could have built into the system. Also, why we weren't communicated with in the first place. We should have known on Friday. So,
thanks, Erica. Okay, other group?
Is that the one with everyone else?
Yes,
yes, pretty much. It has, yeah.
Okay, we all had pretty much faced this situation as well. And so it was kind of interesting seeing the different limitations that we all had. And like, to a certain extent, we all agreed on the solution, which, you know, the immediate solution would be to bring in dehumidifiers and fans and maybe even portable air conditioning units in gallery spaces. I thought, like, at least at an institution like mine, we'd want to talk to probably folks in like visitor services or something, as well as facility staff, and yeah, like figure out what the breakdown in communication was. At my institution, I think, like, to a certain extent, this summer, because we were on a skeleton staff when this happened to us, collections management staff who were left, were doing daily walkthroughs and checking off loggers, and that was one way to deal with it. One of the folks in our group actually had to evacuate a gallery because the gallery opened directly into gardens, and it was very hard to keep the humidity stable with people walking in and out. So, yeah, I like the idea of trying to build in a redundancy into the HVAC system. We did not think of that one. But yeah, clarifying communication notes, and also someone suggested having loggers that you could maybe check offsite or independently, so that you weren't tied to facilities' environmental monitoring systems. I think that was everything we discussed. Feel free to jump in if I missed anything.
Well, thank you, Sarah. All these are fantastic suggestions for what you would do to prevent it from happening again. And from my experience, all of your responses felt very helpful as like what you would do, what would be your responsibility, but there was still no clear delineation of roles of who is doing what. You're really asking a lot of questions and not moving forward. So let me kind of show you what I was envisioning, how I would handle this. So this is what I would end up doing, is I would set up, as was one of your tasks, set up an incident command system. So really you need to direct that somebody is in charge. And within these scenarios versus at your institution, you really need to think this through. Like, who is going to be in charge of these situations and becomes the incident commander? And then the incident commander needs to work directly with a collections team and an operations team. Now, underneath this operations team, I would have someone who does facilities. And the facilities person would talk to the operations team lead, who would talk to the collections team lead. That way you know what is happening across the board, and all of it is managed by the incident commander moving those chess pieces. I would walk in, and the first thing I would do would be do a damage assessment. That would require my entire team to walk around to the collections department and say, all right, let's check for mold. Let's actually figure out the temperature in each of these. Did the temperature infiltrate the cabinets, the exhibit cases, things like that? You need a full assessment to understand what's going on. Otherwise, you can't actually assign your teams beneath you. Facilities should be working on repairs, bringing in any sort of outside help, such as dehumidifiers, portable HVAC systems. But you also need to talk to your communications group. What if you need to close the museum for 2 or 3 days? That needs to somehow get out to your people, your visitors, and things like that. So you need to bring them into the conversation. With the collections team, once we perform this assessment, we're like, okay, there's not a lot we can do. There's no mold growth. We just need to stabilize the situation by bringing in those things from the facility staff, or maybe even moving things to a safer location where the humidity is lower. But you can, and then you still have to keep monitoring and controlling the temperature and relative humidity. So this is sort of how this kind of lays out. And once everyone has a specific role, they can be given a specific responsibility. And this is what I'm saying with using those action terms. Okay, I'm going to do this. You do that. You do that. You do that. And it kind of all works out. So someone in your group can always be the incident commander, if that helps you assign these roles. But see how this is much more like fluid. People know what they're doing. All right, any questions about the scenario in general? Anything? The people here who have worked with me before, they know I'm very kind, but I'm very harsh when it comes to making sure people understand emergencies, because I want you all to be better and have effective response. All right, because I'm going to give you 3 more scenarios. So if you don't understand this, let me know now. But yes, in general, you all did the right thing. The first thing you did when you came on was asking questions to the facility staff. That is part of your assessment. So you're on the right track. Let's just make it a little bit tighter. All right, cool. Ready for scenario 2? Any questions? All right, going in. Oh, good, wrong way. All right, scenario 2. You'll also have 10 minutes for this as well. And again, it's on that Google Doc. At 11 p.m. on a Saturday in August, the National Weather Service has elevated the status of an approaching hurricane, Category 4 hurricane, from a watch to a warning. Approximately 80% of staff who live in the area are under evacuation orders. The museum is in the direct path of the hurricane, which is expected to make landfall within 36 hours. So you have the same questions here, except for I added one, was what resources do you need? Resources can be anything, people, places, things. So start thinking that through. Any questions about this scenario? All right, I will come in and check on you guys. Carmen, I think we're ready.
All right, looks like everyone is back now. We're gonna ask everybody to report back. So let's start with room 2 first. Lee and Syra, if one of the 2 of you could report back for us.
Sure. So the way we sort of ended up setting it up was, let me just double check. Yes, so roles and responsibilities. We had an incident commander, and under the incident commander, an assessment team to decide what is valuable or what is most under threat. And so to decide what to evacuate if there's something to evacuate, and then an evacuation team, which underneath it would have people in charge of packing items, documenting items, moving the items, and then have somebody prepared to receive them in whatever place that we've determined to be safe. And the documentation team would also have members who are with the packing team and the people who are at kind of the end space of storage to record all of this as it kind of goes along. We'd want communications, like a communications person and a safety officer kind of attached to the incident commander. And we'd assume that the incident commander would have to work with some kind of buildings or facilities staff. In terms of resources, like the most basic ones would be space and people, because it sounds like we couldn't necessarily rely on our staff. 80% of staff is a lot of people who would be busy probably taking care of their own situation. We'd also need like packing materials and possibly like dollies and things for moving, depending on whether or not we were going more like down corridors or up and down stairs. And in terms of specific steps to protect objects and people, again, for objects, packing materials and safety equipment for folks, personal protective equipment, and we have a safety officer to kind of go around and make sure that people are not overextending themselves. And to keep this from ever happening again, it would be good to fortify the building. Lee talked about having shutters, or I forget the term that you use, Lee, but like the special glass. And also having an emergency plan would be a good idea, to have kind of gone through this, to have thought through the situation and to have a plan for it before it happens. And that's as far as we got.
Oh, that's great. You guys did a lot of work. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask room 3, Carla, Mark, and I realize now after Rebecca told me there's a couple other people in your groups who are just in the room with you. So if one of you guys could report back, that'd be great.
Sure. So we're fortunate in that we have a very extensive hurricane plan, and as far as the ownership, our COO is sort of the incident coordinator, and then each department has their own roles. And the way we divide it up is we have stage 1, which is the beginning of hurricane season, and that's just getting everything ready, getting generator rentals lined up, getting food and water lined up for the season, things that, just that everybody's ready, everybody has the plan, we have printed list of volunteer contacts, etc. Stage 2 is this scenario that's presented, is when there's a threat. And then a whole series of other things kick off at that point. And the first priority, of course, is to protect the humans. So in this case, 80% of the staff who live in the area under evacuation, that's the first priority. It can create a situation where you now don't have the human resources to get ready. So that's why being, kind of pulling the trigger early is important. Sometimes it's a waste and the storm turns. But, if you have to board up buildings and you need people, well, you have to give them time to evacuate. So you have to do it pretty far in advance. That's a tough call. And then as far as resources, we certainly have materials available for the recovery effort, and our plan is broken down into before the storm and then after the storm recovery. So we have some materials, but of course you don't know what you will face when you come back, and certainly a category 4 storm can do a lot of damage. So one of our plans is to send somebody out of the impacted area to get whatever supplies we need, because locally you're not going to find what you need. Resources so those would be external physical resources, and then there are human resources. We have plans to call in volunteers that work here normally to help with whatever activity is being directed. And then also there's sort of a non-spoken agreement among botanical gardens that we help each other out. So we'll send our staff to other gardens that are impacted and vice versa. So those are some of the human capital resources. Mark, any other points you want to bring up?
Just again, we've had a system in place we've been massaging it for 5 years, and unfortunately we've had to open it up at least once a year to deal with, global warming and the more storms that we have. So we have an organized incident command system in place, and we get to practice it, seems like every year. It's protecting people first, and then dealing with the remnants of a disaster second.
Okay, thanks. And Erica and Jenny?
I think that we all sort of had similar conversations. I think the only thing that we sort of have to add is that we have sort of similarly like pre-event checklist that each team is going to be running through. So that includes things like clearing the roof of debris and ensuring that like downspouts are cleared out. We are completely landlocked. So that's where our priorities usually are. Part of that is also communicating with HERA, which is the Heritage Emergency Response Atlanta group, and then other regional groups to ensure that we're going through things, and then if there's other institutions that sort of either can help or volunteer networks that we can plug into, that we're aware of those and they know to check in with us.
Thank you very much. It looks good.
But those are the sort of the other things that people maybe didn't say. So.
Oh, that's all great. One of the beauties of running scenarios like this is you can really start identifying what areas are still at risk. And, honestly, after you finish a risk assessment, you should start running scenarios so that way you can identify even more gaps, more mitigation measures you can take, more preparedness measures you can take. And scenarios are a great way to really identify the things that aren't readily visible. So great all around. You want to see what I would do? Dun, dun, dun. So this is how I wrote it out. As you see, it's a little bit different than the last scenario because this is a much bigger deal in a way. You have a lot of unknowns. You've got 36 hours to do what you need to do. You only have 20% of your staff. And it's quite possible you take a lot of preventative measures and the hurricane veers off and you never had a problem at all, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Sorry, it's a little small. Hopefully it's not too hard to see. But you have, again, someone who has to be in charge of the situation. That's why I encourage you all to take the ICS training so you are comfortable setting these things up. Then, instead of just collections and operations, I now have a logistics team. While I'm worried about the collection, I'm asking someone in logistics to find me an evacuation site and to gather my supplies for me. So this is why I was saying that you really need to practice effective reporting out, because you need to be able to go to your logistics team and be like, okay, I finished my assessment. This is the supplies I need. I need you to find me an evacuation site at least 20 miles away and go. It needs to be very quick reporting and very, very clear. I've worked with a lot of people who, if I give them a supply list and it doesn't have quantity, they send it back to me. If I don't tell them exactly what it is, they send it back to me. So you need to have very clear reporting out, logistical things. But then with the collections team, I need people to start stabilizing things that can't be evacuated, evacuating the things that can be evacuated, and someone who's documenting what is being evacuated where. This was a big issue after Hurricane Harvey, where a lot of institutions were like, oh, we're all going to share the storage space from the evacuation of Hurricane Harvey. And then when they were redistributing their stuff after the hurricane, there was a legitimate legal fight over who owned what, because there was no documentation in the shared space. So you really need to document all of your stuff and where it's going and where it's being stored within that space. And then underneath evacuation, you could have 3 or 4 more teams. the people who are packing, the people who are moving, the people who are documenting, you know, these teams can keep going. This is just basic. And then your operations team is doing the same thing. They're taking care of facilities and they're communicating with your public on what's going on with you all in a very effective manner. And resources, I covered most of what you all are thinking about. You can see the list here, but yeah, you need supplies for doing all this. Do you need to get a vehicle for moving the collection? Do you have the supplies to set up your new temporary storage location? And evacuation is a loose term. Evacuation can be me take it someplace else or just moving it within your own building. So evacuation can just be up a few floors, whatever you need, something internal. And don't forget your documentation material as part of your resources. But as Erica was saying, resources are also people who can help you. So calling in HERA, calling in the National Heritage Responders, calling in your lines for response, whatever it takes, people are also a resource. Any questions?
We did have one question in the chat box. If you could share these slides so that they could share them within their institution to other people as well.
I mean, I can. These are kind of half thought out scenarios, but yeah, I mean, I can share anything, but I would really just encourage you to take the ICS training so you get very comfortable. And another great resource is David Carmichael's book, Implementing the Incident Command System at Institutional Level. He has lots of great diagrams as well. But yes, I can share all this stuff if you guys want. Any other questions? You just ready to jump into scenario 3? All right. Hopefully you guys are getting better already. So I feel like by scenario 4, you're going to be experts. I sense it. All right.
Except for I keep mixing their rooms up, which I'm going to do again. So
I mean, that's good practice. Every time I responded as a visitor to a disaster, you know, when I responded to Hurricane Michael, Harvey, Matthew, Irma, Maria, Dorian, you know, all of those, I've been invited and I've had to work with different people. So this is not a bad skill set to have. So a controlled vegetation burn gets out of hand due to high winds and dry conditions causing fires in your immediate area. The spread of the fire has prevented staff from inspecting the building for 3 days. The building has not burned, but the HVAC system continued to pull in outside air, resulting in a large amount of smoke and soot making it into the building. The smoke and soot has spread throughout collection storage and exhibition spaces, making it unsafe for collections and visitors. Sorry for the typo in there, but any questions about this scenario? All right, I will come and check on you guys. Carmen, whenever you're ready.
hi, welcome back, everybody. All right, we're going to go through this one more time. Room 3, if we could have Lee or Mark report back on the specific scenario.
I'm going to let Chris take the lead from Selby. This is Chris.
Okay. Hi, Chris.
Hey, guys. Hey, how's it going? All right. So essentially, yeah, we're going to be using our COO as our incident commander again for this situation. We broke it down into 2 separate boxes. One's going to be the assessment team, which is comprised of the facilities group, and then also our art education group would also be a part of the assessment. In addition to that, to kind of help flow the communication, we would use our registrar to be in that 3rd box to kind of help us with facilitating what needs to go on next and where we need to put our next foot. As far as the resources we would need, it depends on the situation. It depends on, you know, how much smoke and soot actually made it into the building. That would be a big part of the assessment team to figure out. We would have air conditioning company come in and assist us if we needed that. But I guess the education department would have a large hold on that, determining how far the smoke and soot damage has gone into our buildings, and where we need to go forward with next, whether that's an immediate cleaning out of our entire HVAC system or something less. In addition, if we knew that something like this was happening and someone was on site, this is if and when, we could always assist in protecting the buildings by trying to block out the voids that we have. We have a lot of historic buildings here, a couple of historic buildings here. So we would probably try to block out those gaps where smoke could go through, and try to be as effective as possible with that. But aside from that, it depends on the situation, how extensive it is, and whether or not we need to close down a building and do a complete overhaul would be dependent on what our assessment team would give us in that situation.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Erica and Jenny?
Yeah, I think that we would have a site-wide sort of ICS leader that would probably be our COO, or we have another staff member that usually fills that role. So focusing on the collections and exhibitions aspect of our campus, we would have a leader of that group that would be responsible for breaking folks into teams by areas for assessment. And then that team leader would also be responsible for communicating to facilities to shut off the HVAC and bring in portable dehumidification and air conditioning units. They would also start contacting our insurance and also outside remediation folks, since if this was a site-wide impact, it would be impacting our exhibitions, museum collections, living collections, historic houses and archives. So it would be pretty expansive. We would definitely need outside help for this. Once the teams had assessed the different areas, we would then have those teams sort of reorganize. One focus on prioritization of the areas by how bad they were and what is most important. And then another team working to secure space for triage and supplies. And we would definitely need space, people, and then also PPE. Soot and ash is extremely problematic for respiratory issues. So that's something that we would definitely want to prioritize. Probably before the assessment, because if your people are in the spaces, they need to be protected. And then as far as like preventing this from happening again, I don't know if this is possible, but like building in a remote fail-safe for your HVAC to turn it off, that would be excellent, because if your HVAC isn't running, then that would really limit the amount of soot that is getting into the building.
Yes, those are possible.
Okay, good. I'm gonna look into those. I'm really excited now. But thanks, that's all.
Thank you, Erica. Can we move on to Carla and Syra?
We created an incident command system where you have an incident commander with a safety officer, and then 3 basic teams, an assessment team to see what kind of where the damage is and to assess, to determine priorities for salvage of objects, a recovery team to actually do the salvage if necessary, and then an operations team, which would include like, which would deal with like facilities and communications and that stuff. We talked about, in terms of resources, probably we'd like, depending on how many people we had, we might need some people, but we'd also need PPE for everybody, probably respirators, probably also Tyvek suits, since soot gets everywhere. we had a bunch of questions about the HVAC system. You know, would it need to be cleaned after something like this? Would it need to be replaced? Basically, when we entered, we'd probably want it shut down and want to switch to using dehumidifiers. I have written fans question mark because it really depends on where you are and how much soot there is. Oh yeah, we'd need HEPA vacuums probably for cleaning items. And I was wondering, would the air still be smoky outside after 3 days of fire? Like, which is why we might not want to keep the HVAC going to get in fresh air. That's why you might want to shut it down. We also talked about if there was a way to control the HVAC from outside the building in future, but the other thing I thought of is if there's another controlled burn, maybe turn off the HVAC or at least turn off the part of it that brings in air from outside. We had a very, very small controlled burn at our institution, and that's the way they dealt with it. And even then, you could kind of smell the smoke inside. So it's not like perfect, but it's, you know, it's a way to approach it.
Thank you. Rebecca?
That's all great answers. But yeah, sorry, you're kind of getting close to one of the great ways to mitigate is usually the county puts out where they're going to be doing controlled burns. There's actually a website I know for Florida where it tells you all the controlled burns are located. So it's something to look into if this is actually a concern of yours. But yeah, so all great suggestions. I can definitely tell you guys are getting more and more comfortable reporting out and definitely more and more comfortable coming up with what you need and who would be in charge of what. The one thing I will say is whoever is your incident commander, they need to be the most qualified person to respond to an emergency. It never should be just your highest ranking person, unless that highest ranking person is trained on how to respond to an emergency. But that's why we do these scenarios so we can work out these logistics now. I've definitely seen many times where the director decides to become the incident commander, but the director or COO is actually pulled in 1,000 different directions during an emergency. They have to be making press conferences. They have to be looking for funding opportunities. So depending on the size of your institution, it may not be the head person because they have so much else they need to do. This is also usually the case with conservators too. They want to be in charge of the emergency, but maybe their skill set is better spent in handling and triage versus something else. So really think about who actually would be your incident commander. And like I said, it could be the head of your, operation, but maybe not. It definitely never should be the person who doesn't show up to any training scenarios. I'll tell you that now. All right. Let me show you what I have written down. So again, apologies if this is really small. And this is not in a perfect ICS structure. So like you could have a liaisons officer that works with anybody coming from the outside. You can have and expand and contrast these as much as possible, but no more than, according to ICS rules, 7 people per institution or per command structure. So anyhow, as you can see, this is very similar to the last one, except for the logistics is working with outside vendors, getting supplies, and the collection team is not doing evacuation. They're probably doing salvage at this point. And as we know with salvage, with soot and smoke damage, it's incredibly fragile state. You cannot move things that have been affected by fire, smoke and soot without causing severe damage. So you need to really look into how to salvage things that have been damaged in this way. And I do touch on this in the FAM salvage technique training that we did. And there's also stabilization, that's getting the HVAC system back online, any sort of air scrubbers. There are things you can put in your HVAC system that shut down when they sense smoke and soot. It's very handy. We actually found this to be a problem lately a lot with COVID, because according to ASHRAE standards for cultural institutions, you should be pulling in about 25% of outside air at minimum to keep the air fresh. However, what this does is it increases your risk of pollutants and contaminants getting into the museum. This was especially big during the protests and rioting that we've seen lately. This tear gas has the same molecular structure in a way as soot. So we were having tear gas actually coming through the HVAC system and spread all over the collections, which is a whole other cleaning up hazmat issue. So, look at your ASHRAE standards that your institution follows for HVAC systems and talk to them about getting those shutdown protocols. As for resources, personal protective equipment, obviously life safety comes first. It is very carcinogenic. Do not breathe it in. You might need vendors or equipment to scrub the air, supplies for salvage operation, always again, documentation materials, and many of the other things you guys mentioned. And again, operations didn't change. You still need facilities to fix stuff, and you still need communications to talk to your staff and the people outside. Any questions besides, Lee, I see yours. Yes, we can share this, but I do want to add to the chat box a link to, oh shoot, a link to where to get the book on incident command structures. Okay, so this is the book by David Carmichael on implementing the incident command system at museums, cultural institutions, libraries, and places of worship, and things like that. For fire, I would also recommend you look at the NFPA 909 and the NFPA 913, which specifically address cultural institutions. Any other questions? We're good? You guys ready to do your last scenario then and do it perfectly? Erica looks so scared. Okay. All right, I'm happy to answer any other questions. All right, final scenario. There has been heavy rains for about a week in late May. At 6 a.m. on Wednesday morning, there's a localized flooding alert. Roads to the museum are washed out and closed to traffic. The storms continue through to Friday, causing power disruptions. Area restoration is estimated to take 2 to 3 days. Staff wait until the floodwater recedes before returning to the institution 5 days later, which is Monday. The receded water inside the building at one point reached 10 to 12 inches high, leaving everything moldy. I apologize for the noise outside my window. It's fire or garbage man just showed up. All right, any questions about this scenario? All right, Carmen.
Hello, welcome back, everybody. All right, we're going to do one more of reporting back. I'm going to start with room 1, Eric and Jenny.
Hello again. So we sort of built our structure with, again, our incident commands person is Susanna. She's sort of over all of our emergency plan stuff, and that's just how our organization is set up. She is not the director, which is good. Our director, we agreed, would be probably horrible at this because he'd be trying to put out all the fires at once. We would have logistics, collections, and operations. Logistics would hope that they would be starting during the we would know about this in advance, right? So we would hope that they would have started to source PPE, reach out to vendors insurance, and like a volunteer network during that time. And then once we were able to have operations ensure that the site is safe to enter and that there's not issues of standing water or issues with possible like electrocution, that the collections team would then be able to go in and organize into teams for assessment and documentation. And then past that, it would be prioritization of areas, contacting, especially, we have a lot of loans. So contacting those lenders to ensure them that their items are either safe or that we are working on stabilizing them. Yeah, I think that we also talked about drains in different areas. We actually have several areas that are below grade that do have drains in them. And Rebecca popped in and said that there is a way that you can reduce backflow. So from groundwater coming back up through the drains. So that's something that we're going to look into. Yeah, and I think that preventing it from happening again, making sure that those teams are maybe trained in advance. And so once we are allowed on site and have the PPE, that we can sort of get into the assessment mode a little bit faster. Would be good. So yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, great, thank you. And next, Carla and Lee.
I think that, and it's actually Deanne. I think Carla had to leave, so Deanne came in her place, and I believe I'm reporting on it. And we took this as something we really didn't know was coming in ahead of time. So as far as determining roles and responsibilities, again, you'd have an incident commander who would develop an assessment team that would go in and evaluate the damage and do triage, excuse me, evaluate not just the water damage to the building, but to the artifacts as well, and the air quality, and set up what needs to be removed, what can be dealt with right away, and what needs to be maybe wrapped and protected, and or just that water or mold contained until we can get to that particular item, and documenting if we're moving things, what's going where. And as far as resources, I would think you would need mold mitigation equipment and a mold mitigation company to come in and evaluate and take care of those things. Cleaning equipment, PPE for all the people who are going to be working in the building, the wraps or bags for wrapping artifacts that need to be done until they can be dealt with, and steps to be taken to protect objects and people. Again, PPE, wrap, containers, bags, removing items that are beyond restoration. Maybe they were damaged beyond restoration, transportation to remove items, teams to I'm just trying to figure out my notes here. And then as far as number 4, what we could do to prevent it from happening again. Well, if we knew that it was coming, we could certainly have a plan in place for it and figure out a place that the items could be moved to that might be safe from water damage, maybe in a higher location. We do have drains in our building in the restrooms. I don't know how much that would help to drain water out. And if there's so much water that it's flooded to the point that all the roads are flooded, I don't know, we're in a pretty wet area anyway. So I don't even know if the water could drain into systems underground, but we found it kind of difficult to address situations of how we could prevent the water damage from happening again, because how do you stop water from coming into your building? So I'd be curious to hear what others said. And I'm brand new in this job, and have never worked in a museum. So this is very eye-opening for me.
Thank you, Lee, and welcome to museums. We're happy you're here.
Thank you. I'm loving it so far.
It's wonderful, isn't it? Next is, Mark and Syra.
So this was my most elaborate incident command structure, I think, so far. I had an incident commander, and then I had teams for documentation, assessment. I put recovery/packing, depending on, whether the institution had enough staff and expertise to do a certain amount of the remediation on their own, or whether they were going to contract out. And then a logistics team to deal with vendors and figure out space for working and people, volunteers, and an operations team to deal with communications and insurance and facilities stuff. In terms of the resources, I figured potentially people, again, PPE, and maybe recovery supplies and documentation supplies if that came down to it. Again, maybe space and like freezer trucks and things like that, depending on what was damaged. And in terms of preventing this from ever happening again, we talked about moving objects up off, you know, like a foot to a foot and a half off the floor, looking at drainage, figuring out where the water came from and if there's anything that can be done with like seals around doors and things like that, checking seams, and maybe installing things like water sensors to kind of let people know early on, because you know, I think it's unclear when the flooding actually started inside the museum, and maybe it started early enough that something could have been done there. So yeah.
Okay,
All right,
great.
well,
Thank you. Go ahead, Rebecca.
yeah, thanks everyone. I think you all have touched on this point that honestly, preparedness and mitigation would have saved you any sort of headache whatsoever. So I would encourage you all to go look at the other lectures given throughout this FAM series, which are on their YouTube channel, because we do talk about risk assessments. Doing risk assessments holistically allows you to identify areas where you could make these repairs ahead of time. So that decreases your risk, but also run the scenarios after you've done your risk assessment to make sure you've not missed anything. Then start working on your preparedness, which is your emergency plan, your emergency kits, and a few other things. So that way, when you respond, you will have to do less, let's be honest. And it's very cost effective to do mitigation preparedness versus, you know, recovery. It's like $1 for every $7 to $11, big money in emergency response. So let's try to do it all in preparedness and mitigation. I did want to share in the chat box the online FEMA ICS training. If you haven't taken it, I would highly recommend it. It's free, takes about 3 hours. But just to really get you an idea of how these things should work more effectively. Think of it as doing triage when someone comes to, you come upon someone who needs CPR. You immediately point to someone, you're like, hey, you call 911. You point to someone who's like, hey, get some help, get something to elevate their legs, blah, 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 whatever you need. But you immediately become in charge as the incident commander and you start telling people what to do. It should not be these long drawn out conversations, because you've had these conversations before with your institution. That's the general theory behind preparedness and mitigation. Let me show you my response. Oh, I didn't change, it's supposed to be 3, 4. But anyhow, as you can see, this looks very similar to the one about fire. And that's because your incident commanding doesn't often change, but what changes is people's responsibilities underneath those positions. A salvage for a fire looks very different than a salvage from a water emergency, but there's essentially the same teams. And you know, one thing I would say is I would actually have a team that does nothing but monitor the temperature and humidity after something like this has happened. But this initial damage assessment lets you know what these teams should be, lets you know what resources you should buy. So you need to make sure you have an initial damage assessment form to be able to pull this off. Then you can create your teams. And the more you practice this, the better you'll be. Only after objects have fully been analyzed one-on-one do you do a full damage assessment. Initial damage assessment is a quick and dirty to let you know all those other things you need to have. So another great way to do preparedness is also to have regular money put aside for improving your preparedness and mitigation standards. Very simple as that. But yeah, this is very similar to the fire emergency. We just sort of changed what everyone's responsibilities are. And I can't encourage you all enough to practice taking notes and reporting back quickly. Your team is only as good at response as you are at giving them information quickly, succinctly, and clearly. So my question to you all is, by this 4th scenario, how many of you actually drew out your incident command structure? A couple people? All right. Those who didn't, would you feel comfortable trying it again if you kept training at it? All right. Did people actually write down their list specifically what type of supplies they needed and the quantities? All right. Would we feel comfortable doing that after I leave you? All right. All right. Okay. So this is just like a brief, you know, easy. easy scenarios, they can become more detailed after the more you all practice them specifically for your institution. So I would get everybody involved. Facility should train next to collections people. Gardener should train next to everybody else. You should have security there. You should have, I mean, I've trained cartographers at an institution. Like you literally should train every single person who has a vested interest in your institution. Do not be siloed. If you're an institution where there's only one or two of you, not very many, talk to your neighboring institutions and create what we do, which is an alliance with MOUs in place that let us help each other during an emergency. And this includes sharing supplies in case of emergency, because especially small institutions, we have no place to store anything. So share that responsibility of financing it, stocking it, and access and so forth. But please go back and check the FAM lectures if you haven't listened to them, because this sort of is accumulation of all of those. Make sure you do it correctly. But I'm also always happy to answer questions.
Yeah, let us know if you have any questions. I'm going to share one slide with you real quick and let you know that all the programs that we've done so far are on our YouTube channel. I'll be emailing all of you a link to that, as well as some additional resources. The survey will be as part of that email, so please just take a couple minutes to fill that out for us. On your upcoming programs, flamuseums.org is where you can find additional programs that we offer. We also have Twitter and Facebook. Our handle is FLA Museums. On Facebook, we do have a private group where you can ask questions and share information with your colleagues. And the next series that we have coming up in April and May is a DEIA series that has 3 specific topics, kind of like we did with this series, that deep dives into specific topics. And then we will have a practical application tabletop as the 4th part of that series. So please look out for those if you're interested in attending. We'd love to have you. And again, go ahead and ask Rebecca your questions now while we've got her on the phone. She's, again, been on the ground in all of these kinds of scenarios. So pick her brain while she's here with you.
Well, if you have any questions, happy to answer them. You can type them in or unmute yourselves. Those of you who have worked with me before, a couple familiar faces, you know I could talk about emergencies for weeks at a time. I've responded at this point to over 100 institutions, emergencies, and I can honestly tell you, none of you are as unique as you feel you are. The responses are still the same. Everyone never has enough staff, enough money, enough resources, but there's ways to work around that, and hopefully giving you some clues. And also, you guys are all colleagues, so reach across to each other and get some information that you can share. No one should be keeping their emergency information super secret. That's weird. Work on your priority list, work on your emergency plans, work on your MOUs with other institutions. You can do it. I believe in you all. All right.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'll just add in that working with emergency managers or people who specialize in emergencies is difficult for collections people who work at institutions, because it's considered not important. But you all are stewards of a collection. You do have to take care of it. And there is an argument for why you need to protect it, because communities do build back better when their institutions are operational. So fight for your right to be represented in the emergency world.
All right. Well, if you have any follow-up questions, I'll make sure to get in that email, send you Rebecca's email so you can follow up with her as well. Thank you all so much for attending. We really appreciate your time.